Hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's London Product Tank. Hopefully I am now live. Welcome to Product Tank. If you haven't been here before, here's a little bit of a history lesson. So we started 8 years ago in a basement in London. And since we've expanded to span 200 cities. You can catch up with our previous events on our Product Tank London YouTube channel. Thanks to our sponsor, Mind the Product, who is the world's largest product community. Recommend you go and have a look at the site. There is a ton of stuff that they produce. A podcast, there's a regular newsletter, there's a website, and there's also a Slack channel. You can also get membership with Mind the Product, and through this membership, we're delivering new ways for you to level up your career, build better products, and lead successful product teams. Mind the Product also has a free toolkit that you can use to assess your product skills and take the next step on your product learning journey to building great products. It includes a PDF download, video tutorials, and an email series. You can also sign up to remote training workshops that help you level up your skills, everything from foundations to leadership. Now on to the main event. So tonight we're talking about PM careers. If you go to this link, you will be able to access a poll that we're running currently. And I have also added it into the banner at the bottom. And with this poll, we are asking one question, which I would love you to answer while I introduce our speakers. And that question is, what was your route into product management? So if you go to that link that's at the banner at the bottom, you'll be able to answer that. Now, while you're all answering that, let me introduce you to our wonderful speakers tonight. So our topic is on product management careers, created by me, Sean Jones. Hello, everyone. First up, we will have Sarah Tan, Digital Product Lead at LSE, talking about her non-linear path to product management. Next, we have Martin Rover Parks, Vice President of Product Management at Scrive, talking about his experience being a product traveling nomad. And then finally, Tor Mitchell, Head of Platform Product at Miro, who's going to be talking about the evolution of the PM role and competency frameworks. Afterwards, we will also be having a Q&A. So make sure on Slido that you are also leaving questions. You can leave questions and you can also upvote them. Now, if you hold on with me a moment, I'm just going to get the results of that Slido. And 3, 2, 1. Here we go. So we've got some interesting results here. So the majority of people have chosen to transition from a different department or from a different part of the product development team. We've got a couple of people who've been in product management since they started working, and quite a few people who were told by their boss that they were now a product manager and just to get on with it, which I think is quite a familiar story. And we also got some people who aren't PMs but want to be, and those who aren't PMs and don't want to be. So a really interesting mix there. Now I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Sarah is, as I mentioned, Digital Product Lead at LSE. She started working in product last year after spending 15 years in other things, which she's going to be covering today. She's going to be talking about her journey here and her recommendations for you if you're looking to move into product management. Sarah, thank you very much, and over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Sean. So yes, as Sean mentioned, I am going to be talking about my path to product management. I'll just do a bit of an intro. So as Digital Product Lead at LSE, London School of Economics, I work on an internal student-facing app, which is around the sort of like utility and a little bit of the academic experience for students, and more broadly, interested in the wider digital student experience. In the role, I have interactions with all the typical parts that you might expect: technical architecture, vendor management, customer journey, and student lifecycle touchpoints. I've been there almost a year, started during the pandemic, so I've been working remotely, like really all of us. and I've been to campus just one time to pick up my ID card. And Product Tank, I'm really excited to be speaking. This is my first Product Tank that I'm speaking at, because Product Tank is one of the ways in which I started to really understand the product community in London, and hanging around the meetups was really a big part of the journey. So on to what I'm actually going to be talking about. First of all, I'm going to basically go through my career in a few different slices and adding a little bit more context each time. So I'll start off with my career, the idealized version as told in job interviews. Then I'll give you a bit of the behind the scenes, all the times I didn't get into product, and then some guidelines for making what I call squiggly career moves. Not actually my term. This is from a book by Sarah Ellis and Hannah Tupper called Squiggly Careers. And I think it really describes the way that I've managed my career path, and it might resonate with some of you as well. So as you'll see, I've done quite a bit of job hunting. And obviously, the first question is always, tell me about yourself. So very simplified version to start. In 2005, I started out as a front-end web developer. After a number of years, I got promoted to become an engineering manager and was managing an agency development team. After a few years of that, it was a bit of time for a bit of a change. So I decided to leave that job, did some freelancing, and then went to do my MBA in 2015. From that, I did a little bit of a career pivot. So I went into operations in the startup scene in London. My first role was primarily around the digital process operations. And then after that, I went into a role which was really much more on the business side, as well as a stint as being in the people team. But you already know the ending, and this is going to be a common theme throughout the slides, which is that you already know that here I am as of last year, being in product. Okay, but so what really happened behind the scenes along the way? So I've moved the web development out of the slide just because that's a little bit less relevant for these kinds of milestones. The first thing that I tried was an internal transfer in 2013. So around this time, I was starting to feel like I didn't really want to be a coder anymore. And I was still sort of doing 50-50 as engineering manager. Now, the agency I was working at had a product itself and a product team to work on. So I was doing a little bit of sort of internal reaching out, seeing what opportunities there were. But due to the way that the agency was structured, some location issues, as well as the fact that I think it just wasn't right, that one didn't quite work out. Then in 2014, that was when I decided to leave the agency, and I went to the Mind the Product conference. It was actually the first thing that I did when I left my job, was trying to figure out what was next, while at the same time taking a little bit of time to not focus solely on job hunting. But product was by that point really top of mind as something that I wanted to investigate. So I got a last minute ticket to the conference. The talks were amazing. It really felt like sort of like my people. And I talked to some product recruiters, and they all kind of said, oh, well, you're a developer, you're an engineering manager. We really are looking for people who already have product experience. So that time didn't work out. Then I went to my MBA. There's this feeling that if you have a technical background and you have an MBA, this is the perfect product match. And I'm just going to say that's not my experience. Maybe it is for other people. But when I was trying to do my job hunt post-MBA, product was one of the ones that I did not have any traction with at all. And operations, the path that I ended up on, was not something that I was looking for, but it just kind of ended up happening. And that's a theme of how I've gone with a lot of my career. But eventually, I got a PM offer. So after the 2016 job ended, which is a contract, I got a PM offer. And this was extremely exciting, except that I was, obviously doing other job hunting. And there was another offer that, believe it or not, seemed a little bit more interesting. And just when I weighed all the pros and cons, I decided to go with that one. So this was not an easy decision, having already had 3 X's on my timeline. And I decided that, if it was right, it would come around again. But there was something around this particular offer that, I don't know, I call it a gut feel, this didn't seem quite the right thing to do. So I went and took the other offer, which was an operations job. And I don't actually talk about this very much. So the other operations job did not last long. It was at a startup. It wasn't a good fit. These things happen. So very shortly after, within a few months, we parted ways. And again, I was trying to figure out, okay, so what do I do now? And it had only been, like I said, a few months since I'd gotten that first PM offer. So I went back and I said, hey, you'd given me an offer before. Turns out that I'm back on the market. Is there anything that we can work out? And the long and short of it was actually no. And this kind of surprised me. But they said, oh, it's been a few months and things have changed. We've really grown. So if you are still interested, you can come back and re-interview all over again. And so some of the reservations that I had, which made me turn down the offer in the first place, kind of came up again. So this was like a double no for this one. Then, so 2018, I subsequently found yet another operations job, and this is the one that I stuck with. And I started feeling like I really wanted to be back in the tech side. So I'd had all this tech history. I was I did the successful operations change, but it wasn't really fulfilling for just my interests. So eventually, that was my top criteria in 2020 was going back to tech somehow. Not really sure what, maybe back to engineering management, maybe to like a technical operations role. But then what happened, of course, is that somehow, finally, this time I made it to product. So I'm not going to go through some guidelines for your squiggly career moves and things that I came across, some lessons learned. The first one is using recency bias to your advantage. What does this mean? So first of all, what is recency bias? Recency bias is the tendency to favor or remember recent events more than earlier ones. So this comes up all in life. So like the closing argument in a court case, or in interviewing, more recent candidates interviewed are better remembered. The end of an individual interview is better remembered. If you're doing performance management, the things that you did closer to the review date, you tend to remember them better than the things you did earlier in the quarter or last year. So what I found is that it takes 2 times to get to, oh, you're an X person, meaning, oh, you're a developer or product person, or you're a fintech person, you're a startup person or an agency person. 2 is not very long. And I found that multiple shorter experiences count more than total duration, with some exceptions. So that being said, how do you get these shorter experiences onto your CV or under your belt? So these are a few ways, right? Volunteering, freelancing, doing a trial period or secondment, or even just shadowing someone so that you can say, here I have firsthand knowledge of how things are run, even if I haven't, been fully responsible for myself. And I'll go into an explanation that will make this a bit more concrete. One caveat of recency bias is that earlier experience can get discounted. So it's kind of like the same thing, right? But the opposite effect. So one thing that I found when I was post MBA, and one of the reasons that I did an MBA in the first place was to become a better engineering manager. And I got out of the MBA and I applied for some engineering manager roles, and people said, oh, it's been so long since you've been an engineering manager. And that was really surprising to me because of my motivation for having gone and left the workplace in the first place. So anyway, I'll talk about how to use it to your favor instead of disadvantage. So here's my career again with a different slice. So by role or function. So you can see the first few are very strongly tech. Then during the MBA, you do some consulting projects. And I ended up doing some sales operations projects just by chance that they were both in that field. And that's part of what allowed me to go into digital operations and then operations and people. And then by industry, so I have a lot of education, but not exclusively. So I started my first job as a web developer was in education. Then I went to an agency. I had 2 freelance political roles. If we go back to the sales operations roles, they were both in big tech companies. Again, there's a bit of a coincidence. And then the operations roles post-MBA were both in education. One was a sixth form and one was a boot camp, and they were both in apprenticeships. So from here, you can already see places where the repeating aspects would give me options at that particular time, if that's what I was interested in. Right. So post 2016, if I had fallen in love with sales operations, which I didn't, but if I had, that would have been the perfect time to say, okay, I've had 2 sales operations gigs under my belt, and this is, my new passion, and this is, what I want to now find a full-time role for. And that's a very compelling story. At the time of the 2020 job search, operations was very clearly in my background, so I could very easily have gone to another operations job, possibly in education, but more likely in any organization that was a little bit smaller, so sort of startup scale-up size. And the way that I first realized this recency bias was actually during the MBA, after I'd done these 2 political roles, which were, as I said, they were just freelance positions. So the UK one was about 10 months, the US one was even shorter, just about 3 months. But when I was in the MBA, you do a lot of what were you doing before? What do you want to do next? Why did you do the MBA? And whenever I talked about what I did before, the fact that I had these 2 experiences, I suddenly became the politics person in the MBA, which is not really how I wanted to frame myself. So I had to work quite hard to frame myself as the tech person, which I think I eventually did. But the goal when you are telling someone your story is to make it seem like it was inevitable. So here I've highlighted the things that sort of ended up leading to product and education, right? So there's the tech aspects. So I didn't actually have a product role before, right? So I couldn't quite pull that through. But the digital operations and then obviously the developer aspect was good for the product role. And then all the education ones tied together to come back into education at a university. Again, talking about the MBA sort of in terminology, there's this term called a triple jump. A triple jump after the MBA is when you change location, role, and function. And it's considered to be extremely difficult. So if you go into that kind of program wanting to do a triple jump, there's a lot of sort of like warnings and preparation that the careers office tries to get you to do. And so the idea here, going back to my slides, is that you want to try and switch as few things as possible. You want to try and convince people that you're only making just one small jump and you have experience in everything else. So they're giving you just one small chance. It's very low risk. The second thing, in terms of the guidelines, is to recognize your whole experience. So I've done a lot of different things, right? And I think one of the things that was tough when I was doing each career change was that people would say, oh, you don't have any previous experience doing X, right? Doing operations or doing product. And sometimes that can be a bit wearing, like on the one hand, it's true. But I have transferable skills, right? And I'm not really going to talk about transferable skills because that's a whole topic that there's a lot of material on. But there's all these other aspects where I can bring threads and experience from my previous work that may be more valuable to whatever role I'm going into than someone who doesn't have that breadth of experience. So here's one example. I talk a lot about the common areas of each role that I've had. So I like problem solving, right? So I started out really wanting to do problem solving with code. So like using new libraries or creating new user experiences, but very much technical focused. When I became an engineering manager, it was much more about team dynamics. And so I was balancing that, but ultimately that's what made me realize I didn't want to be a developer anymore, was because I was much more interested in the team and the way that the organization worked. After the MBA, when I was doing operations, it's a lot about internal efficiencies. And these things had threads when I was doing coding. Like when you're doing code, like you are kind of focused on efficiencies in a slightly different way. But so here I was getting more interested in processes and how do teams work together. those kinds of things. And then when I was in the operations role where I was in the people team, it was a lot more about organizational behavior and how do those dynamics work at the company level. And you can see there's a gap here of the tech where in 2018, I was kind of thinking, all right, maybe I'm just doing this change and I have a technical background and that's useful, but it's not actually what I'm going to do at the core of going forward. Over those 2 years, like I said, I realized that was not what was making me happy. So when I put tech back in, you can see by the end here, I've got these 4 arrows, whereas at the beginning, I only had 2, and they've also changed. So there's the idea of just recognizing who you are and what you bring to each role. Experience across industries is also highly relevant, but I'm going to leave that for Martin's talk, which comes next. Next guideline is about intuition and luck. So developing intuition, this comes along a bit with the seniority aspect that I mentioned before. I think it's just a matter of, it's a bit hard to describe this section, but I think it's just a sense of when you move into a new organization or a new place, with all of your previous experiences, you start to be able to match things. And you do this when you're operating in your role itself and also during your job hunt. So getting a sense of what feels right, what doesn't feel right. And so this is something that, like when I turned down that very first product offer, it was very much intuition based. And I definitely wrestled with it a lot, because what are the chances that another one would come along, because I kept trying to do a transition. But I think it's really important to realize that you don't get less senior. Obviously, you're getting more senior as you grow in your career, even if the career isn't linear. And you don't have to start from 0 every time. So maximizing luck, this can sound a bit funny, right? Because luck seems all about chance. And there is definitely still a chance element. But there's your quote of luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. So I definitely think there are ways that you can maximize luck and just increase those chances. Because when everything is a numbers game, then the percentages really matter. So one way is networks, right? Networking, again, I'm not going to really talk about it, but strong and weak ties, particularly weak ties, are the people who you don't know in your closest circle, but the people maybe who they know, because they're the ones who are exposed to different things than you are. And so if you start reaching out to those people, then they will be able to have a wide range of opportunities that they may know about and then tell you. Another thing is asking people, to keep an eye out, but telling them what you specifically want. So I think it's very common to say, oh, I'm interested in changing the product. And that's just very broad, because people don't exactly know what your interests are, and also necessarily the particular parts of your background that make you strong for a particular position. So being able to say, oh, I'm interested in product, and I really want to be in a role where where I'm in charge of the go-to-market strategy. Something like that is much more helpful, because people want to be helpful. They just need some help so that they can identify, with their radar. They can fine-tune their radar and be as helpful as they can. So some of this luck is a lot about people and relationships. I want to address the fact that there's some privilege and structural issues around this. So I also just want to bring up the fact that you can think about how, if you're on the other side, how can you increase someone else's luck, right? How can you be that mentor or sponsor or that hiring manager who takes a chance on someone when they're looking for this? Weighing priorities and trade-offs. This is fairly standard job hunting advice. But for a squiggly move, here are some things that I think are particularly important. One is uncommon or rare opportunities. So being able to really, I'm going to say capitalize, but being able to take advantage of opportunities that may not come around that often. And so that is one way that I ended up with some of the roles that I did in my background is because, they may not have been typical, but it felt like, oh, if I don't take it this time, it may not come around again, right? To join a company at this particular stage, for example, or to work with this particular person who I've worked with before, and they may not have a slot with them again. Another one is new skill development. This is why you're making the change in the first place. Making sure, will you actually get to do the new thing and not just the old thing? So they may appreciate the fact that you have development background or project management background, but you're not actually wanting to do exactly that thing in your role. So making sure that there is the real opportunity to do that new thing that you want to do. And also manager and organizational support. So this is in some ways, I would hope, taken for granted that this is a thing that you get. Not always true. But I think it's particularly important when you're doing a bit of a change, because you will need more support, right? Because you haven't done exactly this job before. And so you have to make sure that the manager and the organization realize that, because otherwise you might just end up drowning or struggling more than you need to. So I'll talk about potential trade-offs. This is a fairly standard list. The one that I'll point out a little bit more is the manager IC one. So if you have team management experience, it's possible that when you're doing a change, you may not be hired as a manager with management responsibilities, because it's a little bit more common to get a career change into an IC role. That being said, it is possible, although less common, to get a management role, because management itself, line management, is a transferable skill. But there are difficulties or just things you need to be aware of if you're managing in a new function, right? So if I was an engineering manager and I suddenly became a product manager where it's managing product managers, that's a different understanding of their day-to-day, potentially a lesser understanding. And so you have to get up to speed in a different way. So my particular trade-offs that I took for this product role, prestige is kind of one. LSE is obviously a very well-known name, but it's not exactly well-known for product management. So depending on how you slice that, it could be more prestigious and less prestigious. Another one is job security. So actually, I took a maternity cover contract. So that's just a one-year fixed term. You don't really know at the time that you take the job what's going to happen. However, it was also a really good way to trial, because I had this feeling all along, right? But I didn't have any real data. Like, what if I didn't like product management after all? Then having the maternity as a fixed term contract would give me an easy way to talk to future employers and say, oh, well, I tried it, it was maternity cover, and that's why it ended. That's why I'm looking for my next thing. And the other big thing, and I really wanted to talk about this because when I was looking at switching to product and hearing about trade-offs, when you do a career change, there was one thing that I didn't really get any real data on, which was pay. So what I didn't have to make a concession on was title. So I went from web developer, engineering manager. I had these quite nice titles, right? Head of digital, head of operations, to product lead. And for changing functions as many times as I have, that's a very lucky, really, career progression on paper. But let's look at pay. So pay, up until the MBA, it pretty much goes up, as I was progressing in my career. 2014, as I mentioned, I quit my agency job. So I was doing freelancing. So this was the trough of freelance. And then I took another pay cut to go to the head of digital role, which was in education. And I'll get to industry in a minute. Then again, progressed up. And when I decided to go into this product role, among the concessions that I made for myself was going down in pay. And so I just want to talk about this as some real, I didn't put numbers on here, but real points of data, because I just didn't feel like there was anything like this when I was looking. So there is an industry aspect, right? Education, unfortunately, just doesn't pay us well. On the other hand, education gives me a lot of motivation, so it makes me a lot happier. So, these are all part of everyone's personal trade-offs. that you have to make. And also, I've also put in the times that I did burnt out. So you can see there's also a bit of a correlation between when I decided that I need to prioritize my own happiness versus salary. And finally, the one of the, I guess, benefits of thinking about a squiggly career is that you don't have to keep moving. Well, there's no real forward, but you don't always have to keep moving in the same direction. You can always go back. So if I look back at my career, so here I've combined the role and the industry timelines that I had before. Let's say, and this is, I hope not the case, but let's say that I decide that product is not my thing. And maybe education, I've done it so much, I want to move to something else. The way that I can go back is, trying to take advantage of recency bias, and also just putting together transferable skills. So there's a bit of mix and match, right? I could look at sales operations in a startup. I could look at like a political role, maybe in operations. I could potentially go back to being a developer. I would need to get the rust off, and maybe work in big tech. So these are pieces that can fit together. There is a time aspect. So in this 2020 job hunt, I was actually primarily looking for engineering manager roles because of the idea that you more or less can always go back, right? And I could create the story about, here's, I was an engineering manager, I went into my MBA, I did a bunch of other things, and now I've realized that this is really what my true calling was all the time, but I've got all this other experience, which is what I set out to do in the first place. And that narrative went over pretty well. So there are ways of spinning that story, but also the farther away I get from it, I do worry that, can I rely on my engineering manager credentials from as late as 2014? So that is the bulk of my content. Here's the summary of the guidelines for your squiggly career moves. I'll just end on a quote that I really like from Steve Jobs, and I'll just read it out. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Being in academia, I'm going to have a small list of references. This is some supplemental reading. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that fantastic talk. And I certainly will be thinking about my own squiggly career later today. Next up, I am going to introduce our next speaker, Martin Rover Parks. Martin is joining us here from Scrive, where he is the Vice President of Product Management. And he's going to be talking about all of the various industries he's been in, kind of how he got to where he is now, and his suggestions for you. Just before we dive in, do drop your questions over at the Slido link you can see down below, and our wonderful speakers will be answering them in a bit. Martin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you, Sarah, as well. I really like that quote, looking at the dots going backwards. Well, with that in mind, let's dive into to this presentation. Please, as Sean said, throw those questions into the YouTube chat, and sort of be as ferocious as you want on those questions. I do love a juicy question at the end of it. So, the product traveling nomad, is it possible to find a fixed home, or do we want to? I'm going to walk you through a brief, bear with me, I'm going to walk you through a brief background on who you're listening to. Thank you all for joining this evening, actually, and taking the time out on a Monday evening as well. I always thought Friday was the graveyard shift, but I actually think maybe it's a Monday, so we'll see how this goes. Some product lessons and some similarities from different industries. Why I personally see great value in having a diverse product exposure. Some of the critics out there might say, well, of course you're going to say that, Martin. You've done everything from product management for plastic wood deckings through to sort of 500-year-old businesses, and then over to software and into SaaS. But I'll stop there before I spoil my entire presentation. And then a summary, and as Sean said, we'll go on to questions and answers at the end. Right. I have had a pure product career, but like I say, to interns just starting out in the world of work, right through to investment companies that I'm speaking to when we're going through funding rounds, or all of that sort of good stuff, I didn't see the light. I didn't see the calling of product management until after my graduate training program, actually, over 10 years ago now. And that was at Rayhow. And at Rayhow, I was an assistant product manager, junior product manager, or sort of all similar, the first rung of the career ladder there. After sort of 2-3 years roughly there, I was approached. I always think it sounds so grand, approached. It's LinkedIn. It's the world of hiring. There's a top tip, by the way. Make sure you're active on LinkedIn. It's particularly hot for product management at the moment. And Sean, I promise that wasn't actually a pitch for myself on LinkedIn. I just realized as I said that. But anyway, so it was Royal Mail that I joined. That was the 500-year-old business. And at that point, I'm thinking, Rayhow is a brilliant company, first rung on the product career, but I want to go, and they were a big company, sort of 15,000 people, 80, 90 years old, family-run company. And I'm thinking, I want to go to something fresher, maybe software, something that isn't about plastics and manufacturing. I want to try something new. I did not expect this 500-year-old business from Royal Mail. And I thought, well, the postmen and women do a fantastic job, but I had something different in mind. And that was actually the e-commerce world that I joined there. But I'll talk about that campfire later. And it's at this point that I thought, wow, okay, reality hits here. The career is for life, not just for summer holidays. So I'm going to have to really think, am I enjoying product management? What is product management for me? What other experiences can I get? And then after sort of 18 months, 2 years there, Royal Mail went from public to private sector. So there were some interesting conversations. And I actually really wanted to go traveling. I thought, you know what, I feel like I've done my time. I've not gone traveling yet, so I'm going to. But that wasn't quite possible because in 2017, I joined Eden Red, a software company. Many of you might know them for the childcare vouchers. They also provide HR software in the employee benefits world. Big company as well. I think 15,000. Royal Mail was 130,000. And that's where I thought product management is kind of cool. I'm starting to enjoy this. I'm enjoying the interaction with customers. We're starting to put a bit of strategy together, having sort of done it from the ground up. And then it was Questback that I joined. And actually, I'll make a correction. I joined Questback in 2017. It was a couple of years before that I was at Eden Red. And Questback is a feedback company. And I was attracted there by the mission that they had. The culture at the time seemed electric, and it was combining a number of experiences that I'd had to make me think, yeah, this could be fun. After a good period at Questback, I then got approached to join Scrive, and it was humbling, and it is a privilege actually to be part of Scrive. And there I sit within the management team as VP of product. I often like to just be referred to as a product person. I don't think you ever lose that. And Scrive are an e-sign, EID company going through enormous growth. And that's a very, very exciting industry to be in. That's a brief snapshot of me. Now, the part that I want to talk about in this presentation is the campfires that I've been at, and hopefully sort of impart a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of experience that you can all reflect on, and you can sort of ponder over the weeks and on the weekend. Again, reminder, please pop those questions into the chat. So the summary here, and we'll dive into the detail, is manufacturing, e-commerce, software, and SaaS. Now, the first one that we go into, the campfire of manufacturing. As my team at Scribe, I'm not sure how many of them are on tonight, but if they are, hi guys. They know that I will refer to campfires regularly. Campfires, tiger teams, and huddles. What I really liked about being a product person in manufacturing is you get to hold something in your hand. And I think that is the first thread that I'd get you to really consider, particularly as we're moving to a world that is ever more digital. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I certainly can't say that that's a bad thing, being in an e-sign, EID transformation business. There is something different when you sort of have a product in your hand. And I would say to you, as product managers, as aspiring product managers, if you connect that feeling into that digital world that you're in, you're going to put your product, your digital landscape on a really strong foot forward. At the same time, it's often hard to understand and to reflect on the problem without going into the detail on that. So here in manufacturing, as you can imagine, you're going into the detail quite a lot. You're looking at factories, you're looking at production, and so you also need to start thinking laterally and creatively. The 2 points, or the 3 points, actually the last one in quotes, I'll tell you a quick story on that as I finish this slide. The reason I say that one of the early themes here about thinking laterally and creatively is that is our obligation and responsibility, I feel, as product people. It's actually everyone's job in a business to solve problems, and specifically to be customer centric and solve customer problems. Like I would say to the board or to anyone else in my team and in other teams, if we're understanding the problem, the revenue will follow. Slightly simplified, but I think you get the point there. And the reason is it was a decking system, a wood plastic decking system. I know it's not super excited. Sorry if anyone from Rayhow is on the call, but it was a wood plastic decking system, and we couldn't sell it in the UK. We were really struggling with it. Was it too expensive? Was the marketing not right? Was the messaging not right? What were we doing wrong? And what we discovered was pricing was an issue, but we need to discover the right niche and the right market to get into. So what we did is we set up a partnership with a hot tub supplier, a high-end, high-quality hot tub supplier, who said, you know what? We normally put the hot tubs on decking, on wood decking or on concrete, and the wood decking is slippery and you need to paint it, and the concrete's cold and it's not very nice. So this wood plastic decking that doesn't bend, doesn't need treating, only needs pressure washing once a year, long lasting, this is absolutely ideal. And so by having this partnership and looking at product laterally, looking at it from different angles, we suddenly then went to the manufacturers, to our manufacturing plants, and said, for the UK market, we need to reduce the certain plastics in there, or we need to increase the color pigment, or we need to bring the cost down. What can we do? And the part here that I want to talk about, and this is another theme where I think diverse industries have a similar theme, is relationship building. So I had to build relationships with marketing, with the sales community, so they could talk about the product, so they could articulate the value, with the manufacturing teams. And actually in my graduate program, I decided to sort of get into some of the machines and help clean them, because you never want to be that suit that just turns up and doesn't understand what it's like on the front, what life is like on the front line. And there's another clue. Don't forget what life is like on the front line, particularly in product, because you could unfairly, it's sometimes an ivory tower of innovation, but stay on the front line. Now, the very quick story before I move on to the second campfire is pay attention to detail. And the reason that I say pay attention to detail is I was sat in my office. That sounds grand. It was a shared office. And my boss comes around the corner and says, Martin, I was like, yes. Why have we got a 44-ton HGV pulling up into the car park? Well, I've ordered some samples. So I walk out into the car park and we pull the curtain to one side, and this giant 44-ton lorry has come over from Austria where we're manufacturing this decking system. And it is nearly a lorry load full of decking. And that's because I'd missed a comma on the order and ordered an entire 44-ton truck full of this decking system. So for the next couple of years, every cupboard that you opened, every warehouse that you went into, hidden amongst the canteen sofas, you would find this decking. Going back to point one, that relationship building came in very, very helpful there. Campfire 2 e-commerce. So like you saw on the earlier slide where I spoke about my career, the Campfire 2 was Royal Mail. And this was a completely different industry. This was logistics, although I'd had a little bit of experience. So there's a good connector. It was very, very different, and it was on the e-commerce side. So it wasn't actually about delivering letters or parcels. It was about destinations globally, building those destinations, looking, are they the right ones? Looking, are they the right products? Now, what the industry of manufacturing taught me was about that customer centricity. And at Royal Mail, we went big on customer centricity. And there's another theme. When we go to the previous presentation about connecting those dots, looking back now, being in logistics, being in e-commerce, having that big focus on customer centricity has been a guiding North Star for me. We were sat behind glass panels. We were watching customers interact. And there's another clue. You cannot in product beat the experience of watching your consumers, your users, your customers, your prospects, trialing your actual software. And it will drive you crazy. You'll look at the screen either through a Perspex mirrored glass or through other software that's available. I can't quote any at the moment because we're in a negotiation process, but there's brilliant product analytics software out there. It will drive you crazy where you think that you've got the story of the customer understood, but when they come to use it, it's a very, very different case. Complexity. Complexity in a large business like Royal Mail, in an e-commerce business, that is a key skill and a key experience that has guided me going forward into other industries. So whether the complexity of dealing with a large organization and getting that consistent product message across, whether it's a smaller organization with say 200 people, but you've got highly complex e-sign products or e-sign or EID products and regulations, you need to be able to navigate that well. I failed a fair few times navigating that complexity. And so it's about getting back to basics there and leaning on my previous experience in manufacturing. It was about process flows, about clear diagrams, ensuring that you're building those relationships so everyone understands where we're going. Now, the Campfire e-commerce as well taught me a lot about pricing. And again, that's another thread that goes throughout the career. Does pricing sit in product? Doesn't it? I mean, we could debate that probably until the cows come home or until we finish a pint in a pub, now that we're allowed to be back in the pub, of course, with social distancing guidelines being followed. But that was the first exposure into pricing. And I'll tell you a quick story on that. In product, I think you've got two options. You've got the option to take a incremental growth, small steps at a time, or to jump in feet first. But be aware that cold water can be quite shocking. And that cold water was really shocking for me with pricing. Suddenly, I'm at this organization and product are responsible for pricing, and you're talking about £100,000 an hour coming through the pricing book at Royal Mail. So there isn't really an opportunity for making a mistake here. What I did was I leant very hard actually on my previous experiences in manufacturing about understanding the problem, building the relationships to get the right support around. Because as a product person, we're accountable for everything and nothing at the same time, because unless you've got direct team management, you're influencing. And even then, when I hire in product managers, which we're doing at the moment, I'm looking for empathy, I'm looking for problem solving, I'm looking for relationship building, because you need to be able to influence. And finally, in the e-commerce world, it was about dangerous and prohibited goods traveling, because everything goes through Heathrow. So again, it's learning those problem solving skills that were so useful in the first campfire that for this one came into force as well. Now, on to the third campfire. And then we've got one more after this, and I'll do a brief summary. We're entering the world of software. And it's at this point that I've thought, I've gone into manufacturing, I've gone into logistics and Royal Mail and the post office, and we've got the Crown there. But I feel like software could be more my thing. And what we did in software was we deep dived into the problem statements even further. Now, the experience gained from the previous two campfires allowed the opportunity to expand into those problems. Naturally, you're moving up in seniority as well. And it was also in software that I really discovered that innovation isn't just from product. Innovation comes from the amazing work that the engineers do. I'm not a technical person. Interestingly, I learned that at this campfire software. Martin, you're either going to go direction really technical, and some of my previous bosses were like, Martin, you need to be more technical. And I hear that argument, but the other argument for that at campfire software was, don't go technical, leverage those relationships, leverage that problem solving, leverage that commercial strategic mindset, and focus on there, and leave the natural strengths of others to that area. So I like to be the sort of product person that goes into a room and talks with customers and understands those problem statements, those success factors, prototypes, designs, and really bringing everyone together. And that is what I'm talking about when it's about innovation isn't just from product. The final 2 points that I'd love to talk to you about is I should have been brave. I should have been a lot braver on the first part of that journey, and then the second part. Luckily, I had a couple of fantastic bosses that encouraged that bravery. And the reason that I say be braver is if you're listening to the customers and you're diving into those problems and you're really over the market and you're doing all of the good stuff that product people do, and supported by fantastic people all across the organization, finance, marketing, legal, they're looking to us, they're looking to you to be brave, to push forward, to answer those questions, to give them the encouragement that, yes, this is where we're going. And I wasn't brave enough in the first part, and I feel like we missed an opportunity. And I only mentioned that in an interview 6 months ago, where they said, well, tell us about failing. And I said I should have pushed through because I believed in the market. I believed in the market transformation, and I didn't push through. But at the other place, at Questback, by having the right bosses, the right culture, and I think I come on to culture, you have the chance to dry your wings out and to really fly. And that bravery there was around leading, around sharing that product knowledge, that product vision, being in product. Whenever we hire people into product, it's high energy, but we also look after the introverts and the extroverts. But high energy, lots of passion, but a super low ego. So when I say be brave, it's not about who's got the biggest ego. It's actually who's got the smallest. But we can sort of encourage each other. And it was at these two places, at this campfire software, that I realized it was actually really important to dial up the strength. I was starting to understand what I really enjoyed: connecting people, understanding the problems, driving the software world, particularly the SaaS world. And I'll come into that on the last slide. Campfire for SaaS, my home. And what would I love to share with you about this? there's something beautiful in SaaS, configuration, not customization. There's something about the power of reaching hundreds of thousands, millions of users that really attracted me. And it attracted me because I'd experienced that in much larger businesses. I'd experienced that in smaller businesses, but made an impact. I saw what software could do, but I could see what SaaS could do even more. And I think we're all going through this digital transformation, whether it's the move to the cloud or processes that were manual being automated, using AI, or all of those buzzwords, all of that good fun stuff. But the second part of that was the power of culture. Now, some people will say product and culture. Tell me a bit, Martin, about how that works. One of the things that I can talk about until that pint is empty, and I think we might actually be on that second pint now. It's water, not beer. Is the power of culture, and it's about product-led growth, PLG. And PLG is arguably a form of culture. It's about putting the product at the center. And so at this point, I was really understanding, and that growth was building from 3 different industries. The same thing is happening here as was happening in logistics and in manufacturing and in software. It's about putting the product at the center, which is the customer experience, the customer problem at the center. It's about continuously learning. I think you can probably tell from sort of what I've shared this evening and my passion as well, that as product people, we need to continuously be learning the industry, the market. And I will, of course, be biased, and maybe I say that because I've been in so many industries. I think being in different camps at different campfires gives you a really well-rounded perspective there. And so it was the combining of 4 industries that ultimately led to the success and some of the failures and learning from those failures. And so I joined Scrive. And what are we doing at Scrive? With highly scalable product, digital transformation, and absolutely fantastic. I cannot tell you how good the culture is. God, I sound like a super fan here, but I guess that's my role. Heading up product, I have to be. But what I'm saying to you all that have taken the time to dial in this evening is you are all responsible for that culture, because it's a product culture, it's a customer culture. And you can be either a formal leader or an informal leader, and both of those are really important. And the difference between formal and informal leader is perhaps one for another talk. But product people, if you're not formal, you are definitely an informal leader. People are looking to you. Now, is product management like dating? I'm hopeless at that, so I can't tell you much about dating, but I can tell you that, yes, I think you might be lucky and you might find love at first sight, or you might have to swipe right, or is it left? I think left, whatever. You might have to swipe right a few times to find the right one. So what will be my takeaway and top tips for you? Get dating. But get dating in the sense of give the job a try. There are no rules. Just be nice. Don't be is the other version, but I gave, Sean probably was like, what's he going to say here? But just be nice. Give the job a try. You can always learn something from it. Product management is exploding at the moment, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's not you, it's me. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you're not the right person for this role. I'm not the right person for this role. It's not the right culture. It's not the right product. It just doesn't excite me enough. Perhaps it's not leaning on some of the key skills that are your strengths, as you saw in one of my earlier slides. So know when to break up and to move on. And it can be scary, but as you saw in Sarah's brilliant presentation, you're always moving forward. Every product campfire you're at, you have an opportunity to know what you like and what you don't like. So again, it's like dating. I thoroughly enjoy dating because I just get to speak to many people. I may be hopeless at it, but I genuinely really enjoy talking to other people and understanding those opportunities and that background and from what campfire they're coming from. So do the same in your product management career. And finally, product is full of transferable skills. Different industries, sure, similar problems, but your fresh outlook from a different industry especially if you've traveled about, is invaluable. So what would I conclude on? Am I going to stay at the campfire SAS? I think so for a while. What would my next campfire look like? I don't know. I think it would be something around sort of imparting product knowledge further, maybe moving to something completely different, maybe to consultancy or teaching or training. I don't know, but I think, as Sarah said, education doesn't particularly pay as well. But product management actually, by and large, does pay really well. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you all so much for listening. I really enjoyed presenting to you. I think you can probably tell I care enormously about this, and I look forward to answering your questions at the end.
Thank you so much for that, Martin. That was a fantastic talk. I'm certainly thinking about the campfires I've been in, and I'm sure everyone else is. And yeah, also thinking about my story dating career and how it definitely does map to kind of different types of roles. And I'm sure in the Q&A it will be good to talk to each of you about how you should know when it's time to move on and when to take the opportunity. Thank you, Martin. Over to our final talk of the evening with Tor Mitchell. Tor is the head of platform product at Miro, and is going to be talking about the competency framework that they have recently created at Miro, and how the PM role evolves as you grow more senior and gather more experience. Tor, over to you.
Thanks, Sean. That's great. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I am going to be talking primarily about career progression. So how do you progress in your career as a product manager? Now, it's a big topic. So to keep things focused, I need to make a few assumptions, which I will declare up front, as you should. I hope these are true for most of you. Firstly, oh, there we go. Hang on. Oh. Just the time for Keynote to hang. There we go. Firstly, you're a PM. Goes without saying, I imagine, but it can be any level, but you have already navigated that leap into the PM role that Sarah talked about. So congratulations, it's a great job. I think you're going to love it. Secondly, you want to stay there. So I'm going to assume your career goals in the short to medium term are to remain a product manager. Product management is such a diverse and cross-functional role that it can be a springboard to many other things. But if you're looking to move into engineering or design or data science or even founding your own startup, you probably need a more tailored personal development plan to support that. Lastly, I'm going to assume that you're not the first or only product manager in your company and that there are opportunities to progress. So being the first PM is quite a different challenge. You have to introduce the role into the business. The business may not understand what you are there to do or how to assess your performance. So I'm going to focus on businesses that have an established product function and a process for promoting high performance. So you're a PM, you want to stay a PM, and you want to become a more senior PM, then this talk is for you. Okay, what do we mean by progression, though? What does it mean to progress as a PM? Well, to progress means to develop your product management skills such that you're trusted to handle projects that are more strategically important or higher impact. And in doing so, you'll further develop your skills, and so the cycle continues. Now, in most cases, higher impact projects come with more complexity, and complexity comes in a wide variety of different forms. The more forms of complexity a particular initiative has, the more confidence the key stakeholders, like the leadership team, for example, need to have in you in order to trust that you can lead that project. And trust is everything. If your key stakeholders don't trust you, if they don't have confidence in your ability to lead this highly complex or strategically important project, then you'll either not be offered the opportunity to do so, or you'll not be empowered when doing so. And as Marty Kagan says, for a product team to be truly successful, it needs to be empowered. But what about titles? We haven't talked about that at all. Surely when we're talking about progressing as a PM, we're talking about progressing from PM to senior PM or from senior PM to group PM. Well, titles are just a reflection of your performance. You will be promoted to the next level once you've demonstrated that you can consistently operate at that level. A common misconception, for example, is that in order to manage high impact projects, you need to become a senior PM. In fact, this is the wrong way around. In order to become a senior PM, you need to manage high impact projects. So what defines these mysterious levels, and who sets the standard at each level? Well, that's where your competency framework comes in, also known as a job ladder or a career map. Competency frameworks document the expectations at each level of the role. They're an essential tool for coaching as they signpost the expectations at the next level. They're important in performance management to ensure everybody at a given level of the same role, excuse me, is assessed against the same set of expectations and calibrated fairly against each other. And they're also essential for hiring to ensure that all candidates are assessed against the same set of competencies and are correctly hired at the appropriate level at which they operate. Now, I joined Miro in October of last year, and not long after, I was asked to represent product in a project to rewrite from scratch the competency frameworks for product engineering and design. There was a framework in place at the time, but it lacked detail, particularly at the more senior levels, and it was overly complex in structure. Our goal was to build a set of frameworks that were fair, were clear and easy to use, clearly actionable, and aligned with industry standards. And this required us to address a number of interesting questions. First question, of course, is how many levels should we have and how should they be described? Now, unfortunately, there's not a lot of industry consensus on this topic, as you can see from this data, which I pulled from the website levels.fyi. There are some patterns. It's clear that entry-level PMs are most commonly called associate product managers. Then you often have one or more levels that are simply product manager. Above that, there's normally one or more senior PM levels, followed by maybe group or principal, and then you get into the leadership titles like director, VP, and CPO. You can also see that many companies also assign a numerical grade, but there's also inconsistency there as to how those grades map to the titles. So we looked at this and we tried to stick to the most common structures that we saw, and this is where we landed. So we don't actually currently have an APM program, which is normally an entry-level graduate training program, but we expect to introduce one in future. So we defined a level for first and second year APMs, then 2 PM levels before senior group, and then the leadership titles. Okay, next question we had to tackle. How do we calibrate cross-functionally? What I mean by that is, how do we ensure that team members at the same level, but in different roles, so for example, product and engineering or engineering and design, are broadly equivalent in terms of how capable they are and therefore how senior they should be? And in particular, how do we ensure that for those skills that are actually common across those roles, like communication or leadership, we're setting the same standards at the same level for all roles? So the way we tackled this, which I've not seen done before, is we took a 2-stage approach. Firstly, we defined collectively as a group of leads across the different functions, a core set of common competencies that we believe apply equally to product engineering and design. These we loosely bucketed into leadership, teamwork, execution, and critical thinking. Then we defined the expectations of someone in each of these areas at each level, regardless of their role. So here's the basic structure that you end up with. For each grade, there's a set of expectations across each of the core competencies that apply across product engineering and design. Those are the rows in white. Then the leads for each function overlaid a set of role-specific expectations for a PM or a designer or engineer at that level. And so those are the roles in green. So you can think of the rows in green as illustrating ways in which a PM at that level might demonstrate the relevant core competencies that span cross-functionally. So in addition to ensuring consistency across roles, this structure has another big benefit. Because the core of the framework is not role specific, it means we don't need to start from scratch when we introduce new roles into the business. So for example, I recently started hiring developer advocates and technical writers, and these new hires can start just using the core framework as it's not role specific. And then as we bring in team leads, they can draft their own role specific examples, which they overlay on top. So let's take a look at how this works in a specific instance. So let's look at just this one pair of cells in red that details the expectations in critical thinking of a PM1. That's a PM at grade 5 under our model. So on the left, we've got the expectations that's part of the core competency framework. So that applies to anybody grade 5 in engineering, product or design when in relation to critical thinking. And you'll see they're not at all role specific. And then on the right are the product management specific expectations for the same competency and the same level. And these two sets of expectations go hand in hand. A PM at grade 5 is expected to demonstrate both sets of behaviors. Okay, next question we tackled. How should we calibrate the seniority of our roles compared to other companies in the technology sector? Because expectations of competency and experience vary significantly depending on the stage of the business. Large multinational tech companies such as Google or Amazon tend to set a higher bar than smaller early stage companies for a role with the same title. So, for example, a startup might promote someone to senior PM after 3 years as a PM, but Google has 3 levels of PM before you get to senior, and each promotion can take several years. Now, startups often use this difference to their advantage. They attract experienced PMs from more established firms by offering them a more senior title. However, Miro is in a stage of transition. It's a growth stage business, so it's effectively moving from startup scale to large scale and hopefully in the future multinational scale. So we had to ask ourselves whether the time had come to recalibrate our roles and levels, and if so, which companies should we calibrate against? Ultimately, we aim to calibrate against other growth stage businesses. We didn't necessarily feel it was appropriate to set our bar as high as the largest multinationals, but we also didn't want to inflate titles or devalue them. So we needed to realign with the expectations of companies of a similar size, or at least the size we expect to become over the next few years, so that a senior PM title at Miro accurately reflects the level of people we want to attract and retain. Now, this was a very conscious decision, and it did not come without consequences. I mentioned earlier, for example, that our competency frameworks, the prior competency frameworks, were overly complex. And one of those complexities that led to some confusion was some inconsistency about whether a level 6 was or was not senior. Cleaning that up led some PMs to feel like they'd been demoted. And those that were striving to become senior felt that the goalposts had been moved. Similarly, recruiters now find that they can't rely on offering better titles as an incentive for candidates. But overall, we felt it was better to move to a model that we're confident and comfortable with for the long term. Okay, next question we had to tackle. Does tenure matter? So, does the number of years you have experience you have in product management have an influence on your seniority in the business? Well, hopefully, you've already anticipated that the answer to this is no. The level of a new or existing PM should be calibrated strictly against the competency framework. Nobody is entitled to a promotion just because they've been a PM for a long time. But it doesn't necessarily mean that tenure is completely irrelevant, because when you're recruiting and when you're sourcing and screening candidates, you do need a rule of thumb to assess the likelihood that a candidate can operate at a certain level. And it would be naive not to pretend that the number of years experience they have as a PM is not a factor. So here's a rule of thumb for an organization of our size and maturity. Now, I just need to reiterate and stress, I'm not suggesting that someone with 5 years of experience is automatically entitled to be a senior PM. But when recruiting, this is the range of experience we might expect for a candidate that we're hiring into a senior PM role. And we would look a little more carefully at someone applying for the role whose experience is outside of these ranges to try and understand why their progression has been unusually slow or unusually rapid. Okay, next question. Do we include behavioral norms in our competency framework? Now, some of you may recognize this diagram from a talk I gave at MTP Engage last year, and it was written to illustrate a point I often make when recruiting, which is to prioritize the things you cannot teach. It's easy to teach someone how to use a particular tool or how to follow a particular process, but teaching core competencies is a significant investment, and that's why we focus on them so heavily when recruiting. On top of that, it's extremely difficult to change someone's fundamental character traits like positivity or decisiveness. These can be learned, but they tend to need to be self-learned and often the hard way. So the question then is, should we include character traits in a competency framework? And can we do so in any meaningful way? A competency framework is meant to help you progress. But what does it mean to progress from level 5 to level 6 empathy or level 6 to level 7 integrity? So our solution at Miro is called the behavioral rubric, and it sits alongside the competency frameworks and defines the cultural, social, and behavioral norms we expect of anybody at Miro, regardless of their role or level. It applies equally well to someone in sales or customer success as it does in product or engineering. And as you might expect, it's tightly coupled to our values and lists the expected behaviors that map to each value. Although not shown here for brevity, it also provides guidance on how to level up in each behavior. Now, our performance reviews specifically ask for feedback on these behaviors because it's just as important a factor in an individual's review outcome as their performance against the competency framework for their role. Moving on, we also had to decide whether to include an individual contributor track for product managers at senior levels. Most software engineering job ladders have included an IC track at senior levels for many years, all the way up to distinguished engineer or fellow. So should product management competency frameworks include an equivalent path? And this actually relates to a hot topic right now, which is it unavoidable for a PM to move into people management above a certain level? And if so, does that mean that all PMs are ultimately destined to move into product leadership in the long term, relinquishing day-to-day management of products and initiatives in favor of team development and coaching? Well, it turns out the answer to the first question is a qualified yes, while the answer to the second is a definite no. In general, above a certain level, some amount of people management is normally required for continued progression. But that doesn't mean you have to cross the Rubicon into full-time product leadership. So why is that? Well, product management is a highly collaborative and cross-functional discipline, as I'm sure you all know. And collaboration is time-consuming. You literally have to meet with people. You have to talk to them, share status, align on plans, exchange ideas. This all takes time, of which there is a finite amount available. At some point, this time constraint puts a ceiling on your level of impact as an individual contributor. I experienced this while I was at Google, and my manager had to pull me to one side and explain that if I wanted to progress any further, I really had to start building a team. I've resisted this for some time because I was reluctant to just become a pointy head boss, but I'd failed to recognize that just by hiring a couple of more junior PMs to work with me, I could create a team to work on the larger problems I was eager to tackle, and we could collectively have far more impact than I could achieve alone. Now, if you're a subscriber to Ken Norton's newsletter, and I certainly recommend it, you'll have seen this recent article which discusses this in a lot more detail and far more effectively than I can. The summary, though, is that companies should offer a track for experienced PMs who love managing products and do not aspire to leadership. They will likely need to build a small team, but that team can remain small and high impact. In the interest of full disclosure, though, I should admit that the Miro competency framework doesn't currently offer such a track because we don't currently have any PMs who are facing this choice, but I expect we will add it in future. And then finally, we get to the most important question of all, I'm sure the one you've all been waiting for, which is what are the expectations at each level of the product competency framework? Now, if you remember that grid I showed you a moment ago, and you imagine that each of those cells has content in it, there's far too much for me to go through everything. So I'll just highlight a few broad themes at each level, starting at APM 1. So APM 1 is an entry-level role. It's normally used for university graduates and graduate recruitment programs. So the focus is very much on learning the foundational skills of a PM and building influence and credibility with the team and key stakeholders. An APM 2 has normally been in the team for about a year. By this point, they understand the basics. They know why teams have PMs. They understand the role that a PM plays on the team. They're still being actively coached, but they should be comfortable managing a product or a sizable subset of a product from concept to end of life and be generating measurable value. They should also have built the credibility they need to engage in healthy discussions about the roadmap and push back on unreasonable demands or scope creep. A PM1 is a fully formed PM who can operate with autonomy on a day-to-day basis and manage all aspects of a product, including the near-term vision, strategy, and roadmap, and can also work cross-functionally with marketing and commercial teams on the go-to-market strategy. They're also comfortable delivering product reviews or status updates to senior executives, and they're willing to speak up when necessary, even in the face of authority. A PM2 has now, by the time you get to PM2, you've got several years experience as a PM and should therefore be capable of managing products that are more complex and more strategic. They understand how to navigate team dynamics, how to marshal the people and expertise they need to maintain a high velocity of execution, comfortable making decisions with limited information, and have the confidence to admit when a course correction is needed. We also made a point of including hiring in the competency framework in order to emphasize that at a growth stage company in particular, this is a critical part of everybody's contribution and not just a distraction that you fit in when you can find the time. Next up, we come to senior PM. That's someone that you can confidently assign to a highly complex, sensitive, and strategic project that will come with a lot of executive visibility. By this point, they should be recognized as a domain expert across the business, be adept at coordinating across teams and functions, comfortable managing complex dependencies, and dealing with fast-changing situations. This is also the level at which they might start managing one or more junior PMs working together in the same area, as we discussed a moment ago. That's because the level above is Group PM, and there's a great article by Marty Kagan on svbg.com that goes into the Group PM role in more detail. But to summarize, Group PMs normally lead a small team of PMs who are working together on a portfolio of related products or tackling different aspects of a strategic opportunity. Group PMs are expected to plan and operate on longer time horizons and actively coach and develop their teams. However, they normally remain very close to the execution and delivery, often continuing to manage key aspects of the product personally. Now, let's pause for a moment before we move on to the top few rungs of the ladder, because we're about to step over an important divide. Once you move up to the next level, Director of Product, you've crossed into product leadership territory proper, and that's a very different ballgame. This is particularly well illustrated by this graph, which is taken from Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry, and it shows how much time a PM at each level spends on tactical, operational, and strategic tasks and thinking. As you can see, once you get to director level, you're doing almost no tactical work. That's day-to-day product delivery. And almost all of your time is spent on operational issues, which means improving team efficiency and performance, and strategic issues, which means longer-term vision and planning. So a director of product mostly focused on improving the operational excellence of their team. That means setting standards, implementing processes and best practices, and coaching their immediate reports, who tend to be group PMs and senior PMs, in effective team building and leadership. Once you get to VP level, now you're responsible for broad swathes of the product strategy with visibility at the board level, potentially P&L responsibility in a large enough business. You're ultimately responsible for ensuring the teams in your part of the organization are fully aligned around the business goals and strategy, and that they successfully deliver the business impact required. And lastly, at the very top of the ladder is the Chief Product Officer, ultimately responsible for the structure, culture, and performance of the entire product organization as a whole. They're responsible for translating the company mission into a coherent long-term product vision and ensuring that every product-related function in the business has a shared understanding of that vision and is acting in pursuit of it. So that's the ladder you're looking to climb. The question, of course, then is, well, how do you get to the next level? Well, there are two main ways this tends to happen. Either you get promoted within your current business, or you secure a role in a different business that is at the next level. So let's explore those two options in more detail. So in order to get promoted, we need to revisit that cycle of progression we discussed earlier, because as we mentioned back then, promotions are a reflection of your performance. So you'll be promoted to the next level once you've demonstrated you can consistently operate at that level. So you need to earn the trust of stakeholders in order to manage higher impact initiatives, and in doing so, not just develop, but demonstrate your PM skills. So how do you earn the trust of stakeholders? Well, your ultimate goal here is to be perceived as a safe pair of hands. When an executive hears that you're managing a product or initiative that they care about, they need to relax, knowing that it's likely to go well. To make them comfortable in this way, you need to start by over-communicating. The key is to ensure that stakeholders never stop to wonder what the status of a project is. You're always thinking ahead of them, letting them know before they ask. This then allows you to clearly and proactively manage their expectations. Be transparent about what is going well and where there are issues. Avoid any possibility that a key stakeholder only finds out that there's a problem from someone else or well after they could have intervened to help. If you build confidence in this way, you'll build the credibility you need to manage higher impact initiatives, but don't wait to be asked. Look for opportunities to have more impact and then make the case for pursuing them. By being the person who identified those opportunities, you place yourself at the front of the line to manage them. Once you have the opportunity, don't make the mistake of thinking that you have to handle it alone. The strongest PMs are those that know how to access and coordinate all of the help and support available to them to share the load. Lastly, a project is only high impact if that impact can be measured to be high. So don't take the importance of a project for granted. Make sure your impact can be quantified, as you'll need that as an important data point when building a case for promotion in the future. So to get promoted, you'll need to build a case that you are meeting all the expectations at the next level of the competency framework. And that case needs to be based on concrete examples. So make sure you have regular career development conversations with your manager or your coach in which you review the expectations at the next level, identify examples where you've demonstrated the expected behaviors that you can include in your case for promotion, and identify opportunities for development. Don't try and tackle too many developmental areas at once and resist the temptation to rush your way to promotion, as that's likely to end in disappointment. Remember, to be promoted, you need to demonstrate that you consistently meet expectations at the next level. And that often means you need to show that you are meeting those expectations for 2 consecutive performance review cycles before you're promoted. You also need to build up a network that supports your promotion and can speak to the ways in which you've demonstrated you're operating at that level consistently. If your company runs calibration sessions as part of their performance review process, in which they assess the performance of individuals relative to each other at that level and the level above, make sure that you have the support of someone who is already at the next level or above that you're looking to be promoted to. And then don't be disheartened if you don't get promoted at the first attempt. That's very common. Just make sure you get clear and actionable feedback on the areas you need to address in order to build a more robust case next time. Another way to step up is secure a role at a new company. And one of the key challenges of doing this is getting over your imposter syndrome. Pursue roles that represent a challenge for you, but have enough overlap that you can add value. Don't make the mistake of discounting a role just because you do not meet every criteria in the job description. In fact, avoid those roles as they have nothing to offer you in terms of personal development. As I mentioned earlier, earlier stage companies tend to be more open to giving PMs the opportunity to step up into more senior roles, but do make sure the scope is really broader and they're not just using an inflated title for a pretty standard IC PM role. Lastly, tailor your application to the role you're applying for, read the job description carefully, understand the specific and unique requirements of the role, and make sure your resume and cover letter clearly highlight any experience that's relevant. Then be prepared to give examples of situations in which you've demonstrated the relevant skills at interview. Lastly, for those of you who are leading teams, I just want to touch on how you can help someone get promoted. And essentially, you just have to help them navigate the cycle of progress. Firstly, actively coach them. Take time to work with them on their areas of development. Don't just rely on them learning on the job, and don't just try and squeeze coaching into one-on-ones. You may have some imposter syndrome about your ability to coach people, but you'll be surprised how much you've learned and what you have to offer. Coaching is a very fulfilling exercise and a good way to sharpen your skills and increase your confidence as a leader. Next, help them build the trust of their stakeholders by advocating for them in conversations and meetings and offering them regular opportunities for face time with executives. They're likely the domain expert in their product, so give them as many chances as you can to share their knowledge with the senior leadership. And then lastly, proactively look for opportunities for them to excel and have higher impact, and then encourage and coach them in tackling those opportunities. Before I wrap up, just a few pointers. Firstly, check out levels.fyi for more insight into the different grades, titles, and salaries across the technology sector. You can also find a wide variety of competency frameworks from different companies at progression.fyi. We are planning to publish the Mira competency framework for product, and we will be. I'll ensure that it gets added there once we do. And you can also follow us on Twitter for updates. And lastly, check out Cracking the PM Career, which is the new book from Jackie Bavaro and Gail Lagman-McDowell, who previously brought you Cracking the PM Interview. One last thing before I go, I'm obliged to say that we are hiring. So if you're interested in roles at a company that looks at product this way and shares the values that I showed earlier, then do check out our careers website. We have 20 plus product roles open right now. If you're watching a recording of this, I'm pretty confident we'll still have 20 plus product roles open then across a wide variety of disciplines primarily in Amsterdam and Berlin. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tor. That was super informative and had something for everyone, I'm sure, both those kind of managing teams and also those looking to take that next level up. And I certainly look forward to seeing that competency framework when it's published. I'm now going to bring in the rest of our speakers, and it is Q&A time. So if you do have any questions that you haven't yet put in, do put them into the Slido. But otherwise, I'm going to kick off. What do you wish you'd known when you started your product career? Sarah, do you want to start?
I guess I'm still kind of at the start of my product career. I think what I wish I had known was that I could do it. Yeah, I think there's so many gates or barriers to getting into product. And it turns out that once I was given the opportunity, yes, there's some mechanics that you have to learn, but nothing about it was not something I could have done. Mm-hmm. I actually was able to do it all.
Brilliant. I think that's a really useful thing to look back and realize. Martin, how about you? What do you wish you'd known?
How brutal it would be. No, I'm joking. How important the relationship and empathy skills are. Product is about people, whether it's the customer, your internal customers. And I wish someone had said, Martin, just make sure to focus on that. The rest you can pick it up. And I think the sort of work that Thought does with the framework is going to be brilliant for future PMs. And so that academia will follow. But yeah, relationships.
Brilliant. And Tor?
Yeah, interesting question. I suppose I suppose it's a little similar to Sarah in some respects, in that I do think in general product management, as I mentioned, product managers generally all suffer from imposter syndrome. And I think there's a certain, like a healthy amount of imposter syndrome where it just gives you that little bit of humility that you need to listen to people and be open-minded and humble and open to new ideas. But I think, as I mentioned, I don't think I really felt confident in my ability to do as a product manager until it reached the point where I was starting to coach other people. Mm-hmm. And so I would kind of reiterate that I really recommend that as a way not just to help to give something back and help other people improve, but also to kind of continue refining your skills and build up your own confidence.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And I can see in the YouTube there is one question directly at you, Tor. Should PMs in the company know each other's levels?
That's a really interesting question, and one that we have we did sort of discuss as part of this process. Generally, within Miro, we don't broadcast it. In other words, actually, the internal descriptors of people that you'll see in Slack, for example, simply indicate whether they're a PM lead, or like a head of product.
Yeah.
And there's no specificity within that as to exactly what level they're at. However, in the interest of allowing people to kind of represent their seniority effectively externally, such as events like this, we do allow people to use the full title externally. So we don't explicitly ask people not to reveal it, but we try to avoid the possibility that people will not so much pull rank, but that people's opinions will somehow be valued differently because of their title.
Great, that's a really good insight. One from the Slido as well. We are multi-streamed here. I think this can go to everyone. How do you navigate potential gender bias and lack of gender equity when looking at career pivots or career leveling? And I guess both from a kind of personal point of view and also from a framework point of view. And it really could be any other biases as well. Tor, was there anything that you looked at when you were building the competency framework, or?
Well, we certainly looked at things like the language that we used in the framework and avoiding gendered language or language that that hinted towards particular biases. I think we have obviously a very strong commitment and processes to in the hiring processes when it comes to avoiding bias, and part of our hiring manager training talks about unconscious bias. So it's something that we try and be proactive about. It's not easy. I'll be honest, when I joined, the team that I was asked to lead was not particularly well balanced, and we've been working quite hard to address that. But it's certainly something that we're very conscious of. I think this comes back to this notion that the highest performing teams, product teams I've seen, have been the ones that have been most diverse in every sense of the word, be it the more conventional demographic aspects, but also things like educational background, the path in that they took, anything that essentially allows you to empathize better with an audience that team is not perhaps as qualified to empathize with is helpful.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we've been focusing on in my company from the recruitment, but also kind of further on. And that diversity of thought is so important to have. And Tor, you're also talking about, and Sarah, you too, about how you can help other people kind of move up. And I guess Martin, Sarah, do you guys have any more thoughts on kind of removing the biases in careers or helping people remove them?
Yeah, well, as someone who is both female and an ethnic minority, there's ways that I just can't do anything besides navigate my career and my life as I am. And so as I've gotten more senior in my career, two things have happened. One is that there are a lot more options that are good environments for people like me. And I've definitely seen that change in companies in general, have more awareness of these kinds of issues, as Tor was saying. And I suddenly have stories about times when I was completely brushed off for things like appearing too young, or the other aspects of discrimination, which you just kind of get to know, when you've had enough exposure. The other thing is that because there is more choice and because I have the luxury of caring a little bit less, when there are places that do give off a bad vibe, I will just avoid them. And I know that other people will do this too.
Yeah.
So when I was at the digital agency and we were hiring interns, actually, we had a couple of female interns who were great candidates. We gave them offers and they turned the offers down because it came out in the conversation that they got the impression that the tech teams were very undiverse. And it actually wasn't the case. Like I was on the team, there were other female engineers on the team, but it just so happened that those people were not in the interviews. So their experience was all male interviewers. And so that was obviously the impression that they got of the tech team. So even people in the early stages of their career want to make sure that they're in welcoming environments and will screen based on the information that they have.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And Martin, any other thoughts?
Yeah, obviously diversity is important to every organization. I find it I'm very acutely aware that being white and male, I'm not the right person to be speaking about this. But it's, for me as a product leader, exceptionally important. We've got a team that's 50% male, 50% female. I actively encourage that, and whenever I'm asked why is it so important, it's the right thing to do. But it also builds a fantastic team and makes my life easier, that diversity of thought and background. And I think any leader that says, no, they don't want an easier life is probably not telling the truth completely. So diverse team, easier life.
Brilliant. I think kind of also to one of your points before, Martin, and Sarah, to you, is this a date I want to go on? Have I heard kind of bad things from friends who said they're, then a bit of a cheapskate, or they're not, kind of a good conversationalist? What other things I should be aware of when I'm courting a new role or a company's courting me, and I shouldn't just settle. And I think that's maybe a really important thing as well, Sarah, to your experience of, you do have the power to say no to a job if it's not the right one, and more opportunities will come up in future. Another really interesting question in here. So we talked about being an IC PM versus being a kind of management track PM, but we didn't really touch on being a startup PM versus being an enterprise PM or a scale-up PM. And so one question here was, do you think product management in the startup context should be considered a different discipline from that in an established or mature business? Who wants to start on that one? I'm going to pick you, Martin, because you look like you have
I have flashbacks from startup experiences. I think a product person in the startup is a jack of all trade and a master of all at the same time, or trying to be. I think going into enterprise, that's a very different kettle of fish. Think about Royal Mail and 130,000 staff. Trying to communicate there is very different. It's got its advantages. Startups, it's quick decision making, fail fast, learn quick, but then it can also be chaotic. But that's one of the roles that I particularly love in product management in the leadership side, is bringing that order, bringing that structure, bringing those processes in, whilst being sure not to sort of turn down the flame on innovation, but keep that Bunsen burner going.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've certainly found the excitement of being in a startup, but it's also, I think, the capacity stretch, which maybe you don't have the bigger company. And Tor, I guess with Miro, you are extremely established company. Would you say you still have that kind of that startup approach, or do you more have the kind of the benefit of resources? Maybe slight, difference there.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I just to put this into context, I spent sort of first 5 years of my career as a PM at Google. I left in 2015 when they were about 55,000 person company. Then 3.5 years at Crowdcube, who were a post-Series A UK fintech startup, so 50 to 100 people. And now at Miro, which is sort of the middle ground. And that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to join Miro, because I wanted to have that experience of that stage that I'd not been in before. Miro is currently about 850 people and growing very rapidly. So to answer the question head on, do I think product management is a different discipline? No, I don't. I believe the fundamentals are the same. I think that, as someone else mentioned in another question, larger companies are more political entities. They're more process driven. Certainly at Google, it's a running joke that it's quite difficult to launch things because the sheer amount of scrutiny that every launch has to go through in terms of compliance and privacy and scaling and all sorts of other things. So whereas you compare that with a startup, which will happily just churn out multiple releases a day and cross its fingers. So I think it's a very different experience, but I actually think that the core skills, understanding your users, understanding the business need, research, data, a good understanding of technology, analytics, relationship building, empathy, etc., are common. I do recommend getting a mixture of experiences if you have that opportunity. I think it's really fulfilling and interesting, but I wouldn't see them as discrete.
Yeah, I would also say from my startup experience, doing operations is really broad and changes depending on what kind of need the company has. So being in a startup, it can span anything from marketing, finance, HR, and OKRs, things like that, as well as office management. And when you get into a bigger company, an operations role will be much narrower, right? You will probably only do none of the functions that have split out into their own things, but what I guess could be called a pure operations role. But I don't think that means that it's a separate discipline. I think it just means that the breadth is different based on the size of the company.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And we're over time a little bit, so this is going to be the final question. What's been the highlight of each of your careers to date? Like, is there any kind of one moment you look on as like, yeah, that was a wonderful bit? Tor, do you want to go?
There are a bunch of examples from meeting David Hasselhoff at Google, which is very random. But
the best bit of any PM's career.
Absolutely, that was a particularly random day. Actually, I would say so. I spent a few years as PM for Google's Maps APIs, and so we were helping companies use Google's mapping technology for their own purposes. And I was based in Sydney in Australia, and I was visiting the US for a friend's wedding. When I got a call saying, is there any possibility you could fly to Orlando tomorrow to visit Disney? I'm like, yes. And they had a huge project to kind of rethink how they manage their parks, and they needed a mapping solution for their parks. And so we spent a day in meetings with them, and then they gave us a behind the scenes tour, and then they gave us tickets to the parks for the following day. It was just completely unexpected, but just fascinating and a lot of fun.
That is fantastic. I'm now quite jealous and sad about how my career has gone. Sarah, what's been your kind of highlight just in general from what you've been doing?
I definitely can't beat that. Funnily, a thing that comes to mind is not so much about personal fulfillment, it's actually quite opposite. So a lot of what I really enjoy in my day-to-day work is like internal to the company. So I like internal efficiencies, ways of working, things like that. And yet I had a freelance project where I was freelancing for an agency where the client was KFC during Christmas, and they were launching a holiday social media campaign. So I did like a microsite for them. And then I walked into St. Pancras Station and saw that site that I built being advertised on the billboard. And I was like, oh, so this is why people do public facing things. I get it.
That's amazing. And finally, Martin, highlights so far.
So this cliche alert, I genuinely just think it's such a privilege to have this career. So it's actually very hard, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. But I think getting free stamps from Royal Mail at Christmas time was pretty cool. And then because I was part of the senior managers there, we had to go and help out for 3 days. And so whilst you're capable of launching products, trying to work out how the sacks work and to put all of the post in there and bag it and tie it, and being rinsed because I couldn't get it right. I just wanted to take my stamps and go home.
Oh, is that a perk that persists now that you've left the stamps?
I think the free stamps do still exist. You get 3 sheets of them. Shame the Queen doesn't sign the back, but maybe one day.
Oh, that sounds worth a company move for sure. Stamps are very expensive. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you to everyone who has dialed in and to everyone who has asked questions. This will be available in the future to watch back. But yeah, just a big hand to everyone, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. Ciao.